Okay, here we are, take 2 on our intro here. We are back on the In Too Deep podcast with a very old, good friend of mine, Alexa Towersey, someone who has inspired me for a long time now. Just the things she does, you know, for people's mental, physical, spiritual, emotional well-being. She's been through a lot since I last spoke to her on my podcast about 8 years ago. She was on my OG podcast back when I had a gym. She's been through so much. She's actually got a book deal as well, which we will be touching on. So racing through the desert, 1,000 kilometers, shot at by tanks, thrown into a remote area, you would call it?
Oh, it's definitely remote.
Yeah. No food, no shelter, and of course naked.
Yeah.
As she sort of starred on a reality TV show called Naked and Afraid. And like I say, I like to kick things off by, you know, I give my guests a little bit of an intro, but I would like you to tell the people from the horse's mouth who is Alexa Towersey.
Look, I think if you'd asked me that question back in the OG podcast days, I would probably have told you about my job as a strength coach, right? And I think, you know, obviously since then and since dying and coming back and then doing all these crazy things, I'm probably more likely to say now that I am just a wildly enthusiastic liver of life. Okay. You know, I'm an avid adventurer with a side of survival.
Okay. I love that. That sums you up quite nicely.
Yeah.
Kind of could be a nice book title, a little long one there. But
there you go. It's not quite.
We'll see how we go. We'll touch on that later. So let's start straight away with Naked and Afraid, right? You were thrown into the Colombian jungle.
Yeah.
21 days. And so no food.
No food.
No shelter. No water. You're paired up with a complete stranger.
Yeah. Normally a guy.
And they just thought it'd be funny just to make everyone naked, right? That was like...
Exactly. I think, look, it's funny because that's the first thing that everyone always asks is like, was it really awkward being naked and why would they do that to you? But I think in the whole scheme of things, like we were originally naked, like, and this is where we're at our most vulnerable. You are completely vulnerable to the elements. And it just adds a whole new dimension to something, but it quickly becomes apparent that being naked is the least interesting part about this entire scenario. And my experience was made that much more interesting by the fact that I got paired with an Amish dude. Now, I don't know if you know anything about Amish culture, but it's really not conducive to strong, independent, opinionated females. And I sort of tick all of those boxes. So I think I was pretty much his worst nightmare.
Okay, so the producers obviously saw this on paper and they were like, look, we're going to put you guys together and just really fuck with you both, right? So
yeah, reality TV guy. I mean, look, the casting directors absolutely knew what the fuck they were doing.
Of course. So tell me, going into this, like what's going through your head? God, so much. Mad imposter syndrome, to be honest. Like it came about because a good friend of mine is a professional survivalist. And I had actually done an interview with her and I'd asked her what, if there was one moment in her life that she had ever thought about quitting something, like one moment that she was really scared for her life and she was like, I don't know that I'm going to be able to do this. And she described this mad adventure, which was on a Naked and Afraid series where she was alone in the Amazon for 21 days and on the day of extraction. So on day 21, you have to basically hike your way or figure out a way to get yourself from A to B to actually make it out of your challenge. And she was right in the middle of the Amazon jungle. She had to cut down 3 trees to make this raft. She managed to get the raft together. She then cut herself in the process. She's now in the Amazon River, like piranha-infested waters, bleeding into the water. She gets on this half-submerged raft. She has a 4-hour upstream paddle. And as she's paddling along, she sees this caiman who just comes out of nowhere and then just drops below the water and comes underneath this raft. And she's looking at the producers, and the producers are like, well, do you want to quit? And she's like, fuck you. 4 hours, she's like, can I put one arm in front of the other? Can I paddle one more stroke? 4 hours, she got out. And I'm listening to the story and my jaw's on the ground. And I'm like, fuck me, I want in on some of this badassery. Yeah.
If there ever comes an opportunity to do a mentor-mentee type situation, because I'm not a survivalist. I do not have any of that skill set. I'm going to put my hand up. Pretty much a year later to that day, she slid into my DMs and was like, so is your hand still up? Because there might be an opportunity for you.
Okay.
And I thought I was going out on a group excursion in a team type scenario. And then Discovery decided that after my interview process that I had a big personality and they had the perfect partner for me. And I was not going to do that. And I was going to do it by myself and do the regular series instead.
Holy shit.
And that's what happened. And I literally learned how to use a ferro rod to make fire over my oven in Bondi over a Zoom call with Kai.
That doesn't sound very conducive to Survival 101, really.
I don't know anything, like nothing. They're asking me, like, my interview was like, so if you're in the jungle, how are you going to find food? And I'm like, try and find some fish in the river.
Holy shit. So how much time did you have did you have time to pick up any skills before you were thrown into the jungle? Like how much time did you have?
I had 6 weeks.
Yeah.
And look, I went out to a mate's farm and he's actually he does a lot of building. He was like, look, all I can teach you about shelter is as long as you've got the foundation right, like this is kind of how you'd put a foundation together. You can just shove whatever you want over the top of it. And he was like, he gave me a little pickaxe and he put me out in a field with a bunch of little trees. And he was like, right, I'm going to go away to a meeting. I'm going to leave you here with an axe. I'm going to come back in 3 hours and I want you to have built me the basics of like a lean-to shelter. And I was like, right. So here's me with my little pickaxe going, I don't know what the fuck I'm doing.
Fucking hell.
But he came back and sure enough, I'd like taken on board the things that he'd said to me and I'd build this like really rustic lean-to, but it stood up and I'd cut a whole bunch of stuff down and I was incredibly proud of myself. And then he was like, here's your ferro rod, now make a fire. And I sat down on the ground and after I'd like pretty much set little clumps of grass on fire that wasn't even in my fire, I managed to get it going. And that was pretty much the only hands-on training I did before I went out there.
So you got certified in the Bondi survival mechanisms within, a long weekend. So
within a long week, yeah, tick the box, and that was pretty much it.
Holy shit.
I know.
So tell me about this experience. So what was the most challenging part? So we mentioned being naked isn't actually the worst part about it.
No, it's not.
I'm sure you'd get over that pretty quickly.
Look, I tell you what, like the funny thing about the naked part is for me, one of the biggest things I did do to prepare was I put on a bunch of weight. And it was a really uncomfortable process for me. I'm not going to lie. Like I've built an entire brand of having a specific aesthetic and physique. And as superficial as it sounds, like that's the crux of it. And I spent 6 weeks putting on as much weight as I could because I knew that there was a really good chance that I wouldn't be eating for 21 days. And I didn't want me being scared to put on weight or me being too lean for the reason that I would have to tap out and come home. I was like, that is ridiculous. So in the 6 weeks, I ended up putting on, it would have been 8 or 9 kgs. I was fluffy. I hated it. But it was actually in the whole scheme of things, when I got out there and my body did all the things that I've trained it to do over that amount of years, it became really fucking liberating because the whole emphasis was taken off the way I looked and it was all about what I could do. So for me, it was just like a switch had been flipped. And all of a sudden I was completely unconcerned with what I looked like. Okay. And that was great.
Did that take a little while to get to?
Yeah, it did. Like I think for any female, especially within this industry when so much emphasis is placed on what you look at or what you look like I think the majority of females are lying when they say that they're completely 100% okay with their body all the time. Most females, we all have our own insecurities. And it took a little while to get into the right headspace where I could embrace that. And it was uncomfortable, but I think it taught me that I was so much more than the way I looked. And I think sometimes we all need that, really confronting reminder. So yeah, I think it was a good thing. I think that was one of the most powerful things to come out of the whole experience.
As well. So Alexa Towersey is more than just this outer exterior.
100%.
That's a really cool thing to think about.
Yeah.
And so how did you put on this 15 kilos? Was it just the Messina diet or was it a little bit more structured than that?
Chicken peri-peri pizza and king-size rollovers.
Okay, so it wasn't too sophisticated, I guess.
No, look, I'm not going to lie. I'm not going to sit here and say that I ate all the good things and I really predominantly prioritized protein and I took a lot of supplements and I did it a really healthy way. I didn't. I really just leaned into the fact that I actually really like junk food.
Yeah.
And I just was going to eat as much of it as I absolutely wanted because I knew that I was going to suffer for 21 days and I earned it.
Okay.
So,
fuck yeah, I love that. And so with the peri-peri, was it crust pizza?
Crust pizza. That's my favorite.
So that's your number one, like
that's my number. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So what did you? And dare I say, it could be the same answer that you just gave me then. But what did you miss the most about real life? Was it the peri peri crust pizzas, or was that
no?
It was more than that.
Probably my cat, to be honest.
Yeah.
Look, what did I miss while I was out there? Probably human connection. And I know that's really bizarre, but one of the things, if you watch Naked and Afraid, is that because you're paired with someone and you have this incredibly intense experience, a lot of people who go out there end up with this lifelong bond with the person that they're out there with, you know, because you bond over how uncomfortable it is and all the challenges that you have to face and the fact that you have to grow together and do really hard things. And everyone has their up and down moments. But unfortunately for me, my partner, him and I did not see eye to eye in any sense of the word. We had vastly different beliefs and very different communication styles, and we did not have a bond at all. And I think that was actually that was the hardest part of the challenge for me, being out there with somebody who I didn't actually trust that they had my back. And I was really trying my hardest to lead with compassion, even in those moments where he was being absolutely horrendous to me. And it's, you know, it's sort of, part of it came back to, you know, when I was 15, I was bullied a lot at school, and it sort of took me back to those days where you kind of felt very isolated and very alone and very having to have your own back and having to move through a space that was quite confronting. But you had to, like, I've always prided myself on taking the high road. And I think for me, one of the most powerful lessons outside of the nudity side of things that came out of that and the body, the body image stuff was conflict management. I think that's a really useful life skill to have. I think these days so many people are so concerned with having to have the last word or having to have their opinion heard or having to be right. I made a conscious decision very early on that I was going to wave the white flag and I was going to really pick my battles, and that I was going to choose the high road and lose a few battles to win the war being that we would both emerge triumphant from the jungle together. And that was the decision. Could I have argued with him? Could I have made our conflicts and the drama far greater than it was? Absolutely. But I just chose not to.
Okay.
And I was actually really proud of myself for that.
And that is incredible that you didn't just like throw your toys out of the pram and be like, I can't fucking do this. I'm out of here. This guy's a fucking asshole. And like I said, it's almost fucking scary to think that you can be so intimate, you know, with someone, but like not have that connection. And it must be like bone cripplingly lonely to like be going through that, but not feeling like you guys are a team. That's what it sounds like.
It was really difficult, but I think there are a lot of lessons to be learned from that. Like, and I heard this one piece of advice once, and it was, you don't have to agree with everything that's said in a conversation to appreciate it. You know, there were plenty of things that I learned along the way that have made me a better person just for being out there and being really uncomfortable, not in the sense of physical, but my emotional security. I really had to lean on some of the skills that I learned very, very early on in my life in order to come out of that and sort of thrive. And it was just every day I made a decision that I was going to get up and smile and treat the day as if it began anew. And I was going to make the experience as good as I possibly could for myself, because fuck him if he thought he was going to ruin it for me.
Yeah.
You know, and I think every day we have those choices. You know, people who are easily offended are easily manipulated. And I'm not going to be one of those people that has a skeptical or a jaded view on life just because of the way that somebody else is treating me. I always have a decision in how I respond to that. And that was one of the biggest lessons that I learned out there.
Okay. I love that. And so can we delve a little bit deeper on some of the issues you faced with this guy specifically? Like what are some of his conflicting views that he had?
So he was Amish, and their culture is really, it doesn't embrace women in power. You know, a lot of the communities that they have, not all of them, but a lot of them, the women aren't allowed to read books. They're not allowed to train. They are not allowed to have a job. Like their job is basically just their family and the housework. And so for him, he wasn't used to seeing a female physically strong. You know, I felt like I thrived in those moments where we had to go and cut down a bunch of bamboo trees and we're carrying them across our shoulders across the rapids. And I was like, yeah, I can do this and I can keep up with you physically. And he didn't really enjoy that. Like if I went out and did something physical, he would have to one-up me because he couldn't be emasculated in that sense. And that was really interesting for me, whereas I didn't want to sit in the shelter and be told that I couldn't go out and do the things that I wanted to. He hated the fact that I swore. He was like,
Did you try to put a filter on for him or...
I tried to be, as it went on and I realized that it made him uncomfortable, I really tried to, one, give him the freedom to express his own religion. Like I would encourage him because he was so religious. He was a God-fearing man. When I say religious, I don't mean like embracing God and the whole, 10 commandments and you be good to thy neighbor. He was very God-fearing in that if you don't do this, he's going to smite you down. So it wasn't coming from a place that I thought was really welcoming or wholesome. But I really tried to get him to pray when we caught a fish or at the beginning of like, if we were eating, to get him to really, say grace, because I felt like for him, his faith was such a huge part of him being able to complete the challenge successfully. I wanted to give him the tools and the freedom to do that. And I was definitely more aware of what I was saying. But at the same point, I was like, God, some of the best people I know in my life are avid, like they're just, they're pirates, they're sailors, they have, a potty mouth, and some of the best people in my life, they place emphasis by swearing, and I'm one of those people. It's just where I'm wildly enthusiastic and passionate about stuff and I fucking swear. Yeah. And I'm okay with that. It doesn't mean I'm less of a coach, less of a person, or that, I deserve to be condescended to. And he was very much like, well, I'm really glad that I don't have a mouth like yours, because that's not what God is about, and that's not what faith is about, and that's not what being a good human is about. Like, I would never respect somebody in business or in personal life if they swore as much as you do. And I was like, well, lucky we don't live in the same place and we never have to fucking see each other again. Yeah, fuck. So it was quite confronting to be in a situation where somebody had very set thoughts and there was no room. There was no wiggle room. There was no open-mindedness. It was very much, these are my views and you sit outside of my views, therefore you're less of a person. And I think somebody who had self-esteem issues or who needed external validation may have really struggled in that sense. And that for me really brought home the fact that I'd done so much work on myself to be secure in who I was as a person, that I could stay true to myself and be the person I was, and I could still lead with compassion and give him the freedom to do what he needed to complete the challenge, which was quite cool.
Yeah, it was always mind-blowing having these people who have such fixed mindsets, right? Spending all this time with you, 21 days with you in the fucking jungle, naked, no food, doing all these challenging things together. And it sounds like he wasn't really coming to you at a place of curiosity, right? He was like, I don't like you. I don't like XYZ. I don't want to get to know why you're like that. Just a little bit shit, isn't it?
He didn't ask me one question about myself in 21 days.
Shut up. Holy fuck. So I'm guessing you haven't spoken to him since, right? Was it just kind of like...
actually, no, I have. I've spoken to him twice since we touched base when the episode first came out and then when a reminder came up. And look, I don't bear animosity towards him. I feel like his childhood shaped him into a person who lives his life with a chip on his shoulder. And for me, I feel like that would be a really exhausting way to live. Like, I had a bunch of hard shit happen when I was younger too, but I've gone the opposite way. Like they say, hurt people, but there are also a percentage of hurt people who understand what it's like to be hurt and would never do that to somebody else. And I think it sort of divided us down the middle. Yeah. And I am on the other side of that, where I'll probably compromise myself more to make sure that somebody else is comfortable.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. I like that. And so tell me, so you did a lot of physical challenges on this show. Would you say you faced the most physical discomfort you've ever felt doing this? Because I know you've done a lot of crazy shit. So like, how does this compare on the crazy shit scale for Alexa Towersey in terms of physical like pain and discomfort?
No, this was not the hardest thing I've ever done.
Okay.
And the interesting thing is, like, I went out there knowing that worst came to worst, I was just I knew that the body could survive. Like, Google is a powerful thing, you know, like knowledge is power. I knew that the body could survive without food for 21 days. I knew that the body could survive without water for 3 or 4 days. So I was like, irrespective of anything else, if I don't get any food, I'm just going to lie in the dirt and I'm going to suffer for 21 days because I know how to suffer. You know? I may not be the fittest, the fastest, or the most skillful, but I know how to suffer.
Suffer expert, okay.
Suffer expert. But so physically speaking, it wasn't the hardest thing I've done. The Mongol Derby was the hardest thing I've ever done.
We'll touch on that in a minute because I love the sound of that. So tell me though, how did you become such a expert in the suffering domain?
I don't think you do. Like, honestly, resilience to me in its simplest form is experience. I think it's not everyone, you know, I often get asked, like, you know, were you born resilient or did you learn it? Like, was it a skill that you learned? And I don't know that it's something that can be taught as much as it can be chosen. I think everybody has a story. Everybody has bad shit that happens to them. And your adversity doesn't define you, but what you do in those moments of adversity, that can dictate where you go from there. And I think at every point, you always have the option to either stay in the same place because that is a choice, or you make a decision to get you out of the shit. And for whatever reason, I have always made the decision to get me out of the shit. Like, I've always taken action. Maybe that's why my name is Action Alexa. Like, intelligent action fixes almost anything. And I've just had so many crazy and often shitty things happen that I didn't realize at the time were for me. I thought they were happening to me. And it's not until you're looking back in retrospect, you're thinking, actually, you know what? That thing that happened when I was 15 years old, that absolutely prepared me for this thing that I'm going through now, or that really shitty situation that I overcame and it was really heartbreaking and I didn't know that I'd make it out alive, but I did. And now when this new really hard and awful thing happens, I'm kind of like, I have the hope that I'm going to make it out the other side because I've already done it. I think the more of those things that you do, whether voluntary or involuntary, I think you just end up with just this inflated sense of hope and the knowledge that, you know, the last thing that felt like dying didn't actually kill you. And that's a superpower.
Okay. I love that.
Yeah.
Are you able to expand a little bit more on some of those experiences that shaped you?
Yeah. I'll use, like, the first time I ever chose something hard for myself was basically fitness. I was bullied at school for being too skinny. I know, boo-hoo, me and my genetically gifted thigh gap, who people automatically assume that skinny shaming isn't as bad as fat shaming, and I understand it. But any comments about your body, especially at that age, really burrow in deep and sort of shatter your self-esteem before it's had a chance, before you've had a chance to understand that none of it is true. And I was bullied from a young age, and when the day that I got a chair thrown at my head in class was the day that I was like, fuck this, what is this? Like, I'm not going through my whole teen and adolescent years being bullied like this and feeling weak. Well, what do you do when you're feeling weak? You find a way to get strong. And so I went to the gym on a mission for muscles to build up my armor and build up my strength. And that was the turning point for me. Like, fitness has always been, right from the get-go, something that has saved me. It's, going to the gym and finding the weights room, that was the first place that I felt safe. It was the first place that I felt empowered. It was the first place that I felt connected. So whenever I'm having a down day or whenever I'm going through something tough, training is always a tool that I revert back to use to get me out of that place. So that was the first decision I ever made when it came to facing adversity. The second thing, my dad was an alcoholic. So my mum was very sick when I was young. She had manic depression. She was diagnosed with it around the same time I was getting bullied. My home didn't feel safe. My school wasn't safe. The gym became my sanctuary. My dad became an alcoholic off the back of that. He was a functioning alcoholic until he was just a plain old alcoholic, until he died of liver cirrhosis. And when he died of liver cirrhosis, I quit drinking completely. So again, I had this adversity thrown at me. I could have gone in two routes then. I could have kept drinking myself into an early grave and killed myself just like my dad did, or I could stop drinking and find a new life trajectory, and that's what I chose to do. So I think, you always have those crossroads, those sliding doors moment where your life could take a turn either way. And I've always chosen probably the path of more resistance. But I've been able to make those big decisions, and that's enabled me to then come out the other side and be where I am today.
Yeah, that sounds like unreal that you're able to make those good decisions. Sorry to hear about your father and that sort of stuff. That's rough, but
I'm grateful for it now. That's the thing, like, again, shitty situations, when you're going through them, stuff like that, you're always like, fuck, this is so unfair. Why me? But you're going to say it's fucking unfair a bunch of times in your life, but sometimes it's not. Nothing is fair. Life is not fair. You've just got to choose to rise above, and you've just got to create that legacy of strength for yourself. And I think I'm incredibly grateful that all of these shitty things happen to me now, because I absolutely would not be doing what I'm doing or have the amount of resilience that I have if they didn't happen,
Yeah. So instead of getting crushed under the weight of the poor things that have happened to you, you've sort of flipped it around and turned it into a positive, which sounds amazing.
I think you have to.
Yeah. So what about the people who I guess have struggled with that? Like, they have, they keep getting kicked and they just can't get back up. Like, how would you advise them to, turn it around and sort of flip their mindset?
I think the first thing is to recognize that that's what you're doing. And I think sometimes it's really easy to get stuck in a victim mentality where your struggle becomes your identity, and that's the story that you've told yourself about yourself. And that's the story you've told yourself of why you're in the specific place that you're at. And oftentimes it's easier to sit in that place than it is to make a change when you don't know what sits on the other side of that change. There are no guarantees when you make any decision. And you have to be okay with knowing that sometimes you're going to make the wrong decision and you're going to have to pick yourself up again afterwards, and then choose again. But at all times, I think you have to remind yourself that at any point in time, very rarely are you going to be able to control your external circumstances, but you're absolutely always going to be able to control the way that you respond to them. You're always in the driver's seat, even if it feels like you're not, and no decision is still a decision. I think the first step is always self-awareness and realizing that that's where you are. And then the second step is like to start interrupting those negative thoughts with a different pattern. So, you can look at that as, if we use a weight training analogy, like if you look at the bar like it's heavy, then it fucking will be. If you tell yourself that you can't do something, then absolutely it's going to physically inhibit you so that you actually can't do the thing. So you've got to, in those moments when you feel those things, you've got to short circuit that pattern and come up with a different loop to go into. And, I listened to a really interesting podcast the other day, and a woman in it was talking about when she got into that cycle of negativity, it would just be like, cancel, cancel. She'd stop it right there. And that's enough sometimes to just be like, I'm in that train of thought. I recognize that I'm in that train of thought, and how do I stop it?
Okay.
And you cut it off and you try to think of something different. And then the third thing is like, try and get a little bit out of your comfort zone at every possible opportunity. And that doesn't have to be like getting naked and going into the jungle or racing horses 1,000 kilometers across a desert.
A little bit extreme.
Yeah. It could be as simple like if you have social anxiety, make it a point of saying hello to a new person every day.
Yeah.
Something that you're not comfortable with. The more you get familiar with doing that, the easier it gets. It's a habit just like anything else. So little steps.
Yeah. It's very, what you just talked about is very, have you read Man's Search for Meaning, Viktor Frankl?
I have not. I've heard a lot about it.
Yeah, so it's very much, he was in a Jewish concentration camp back in the Nazi Germany days. And he was a psychologist, and his whole thing was, I can have all this terrible, like what's more terrible than being in a concentration camp? I think his family was all killed. But he had this sort of internal locus of controls. I can control how I react to what's going on around me, it's super inspiring. And just like you said, and then when it comes down to awareness, like that's number one, right? If someone doesn't know they have these negative patterns in their head, how the fuck are they going to stop them? So 100%. First stop's always awareness, right?
Absolutely. With anything, like, when I quit drinking, it was like having to come to that confronting realization that binge drinking was a problem.
Yeah, I wanted to come back to you and circle around on that, on the alcohol thing, because I feel like in Australia as well, and you were born in the UK, right?
Born in the UK.
Yeah. So Brits, Aussies, like they love piss. Like they love sinking bulk piss. You know that. Everyone in Australia knows that, and a lot of I had a couple guests on so far, and we always sort of touch on this, like people's relationship with alcohol. So, did you have a bad relationship with alcohol back in the day?
Oh, it was probably the most toxic relationship of my life.
Well, there you
And
go.
that's saying something.
Well, there we go. We might touch on dating if we have time a bit later. But
Yeah.
again, so was it like your father passed away from alcoholism? Did something click in you, and you just were like, I'm never drinking again, or did you turn to the drink to cope with that originally, or how did that sort of work? And did it flick just switch in your head, or how did you get over alcohol, so to speak? How did you break up with alcohol?
How did I break up with it? It was a long and tedious and messy fucking breakup.
Yeah.
No, look, the opposite of addiction isn't necessarily sobriety. It's connection, right? People are always looking for connection. I found my first sense of connection at the gym. I found my second sense of connection when I found my dad's whiskey bottle. And I had, at the age of, 15, 16, I had this dual existence. In the weekdays to cope, I would go to the gym, and that was where my second family, my community were. In the weekends, to fit in with my peers, I would binge drink. And quite often I did not have an off switch. And I often look back on my drinking now, and it was like, I never drank because I liked the taste of alcohol. I drank because I didn't like myself. And that was the major problem. So I did not have an off switch. I drank until I threw up, blacked out, or, threw up or blacked out pretty much, passed out. And it wasn't healthy. And I did that all the way through until I was 29. When I was 29, my dad, who'd been an alcoholic the whole way through, when mum got diagnosed, that was his coping mechanism. So while I went to the gym and then binge drank in the weekends, he just drank. And it started off like he was a really highly functioning alcoholic. He still went to his job. He still was the breadwinner. He still did all of the things that a dad should do. But then in his downtime, it was just him, his bottle of whiskey, and a banana sandwich. That was just my dad. And he wasn't a bad drunk. He wasn't an abusive drunk. He was still a lovable dad, but it was a heartbreaking journey to watch because, even through uni, I remember having this one conversation with him where I realized the extent of it. And I'd gone from uni to his place, and he'd already been drunk. He'd taken the day off work and he'd called in sick, but he was just drunk. And he'd been like, can you take me to the alcohol store? And I was like, no, I absolutely will not take you to the alcohol store. We need to sober you up. You need to go to work. This is ridiculous. You can't be at home just drinking every day. And he was like, well, if you don't take me to the alcohol store, I'm going to drive myself. And I'm just like, at this point, you're kind of left with these two choices. You're like, if I take him to the alcohol store, I'm enabling him. But if I don't take him to the alcohol store, he could drive drunk and hurt somebody else. So, where is the least damage going to be done here? So I would take him to the alcohol store, and I come back and I'd be like, I just ended up screaming and crying and being like, why? You realize you're killing yourself. You realize that, if I ever get married, you're never going to be at my wedding. You're never going to see any grandkids. You're never going to be able to give me away. You're never going to do a dad speech, nothing. You're not going to see any of these pivotal moments because you're going to be dead from drinking. And he was just like, Alexa, I wish I could tell you I loved you enough to stop, but I can't. And it was that, holy shit. And that's the thing when it comes to drinking. You can't guilt someone out of it. You can't shame someone out of it. You can't love someone out of it. Someone will only stop. And that goes for any form of addiction when they are ready to stop. And that was my realization. It was like, I can either choose to walk away from this person and he's no longer my dad and I'm not going to have a relationship with him at all because I don't agree with what he's doing. Or I just know that this is who he is and I just try and make the best of it from here on going forwards. And that's what I decided to do. And I was in Hong Kong when he passed away at 29. And by the time I got the call from the hospital to say, your dad's had liver cirrhosis, he's now in a coma, I flew back to New Zealand and I never got to say goodbye. By the time I got to his hospital bed, he was too far gone. He never really woke up again. And so I had to say goodbye to him. I stayed there. We had the funeral. My partner flew over, who was there at the time. And I went to his funeral. I drank his last bottle of whiskey. I danced on the bar. I fell off the bar. I threw up all over myself. I tried to go to my hotel room, fell in a fucking ditch and passed out.
that was great. And anyway, my partner managed to get me into bed. I woke up the next morning, I turned over and I was like, I am never fucking drinking again. And he just laughs at me because, you know, when have you not said that? Anybody who's ever binge drank or been out on a big Saturday night has woken up the next morning being like, I'm never fucking drinking again. Yeah. And then the next weekend comes along. And I was like, no, I'm done. Like, I'm fucking done. And I really was done. I never drank again. For me, that the reality of the situation is sometimes the consequences of what you're doing have to be so bad that there is no alternative for you to quit. And for me, like, my dad had killed himself through alcohol, and I was like, I'm not doing what he did. I'm not going to be that person.
Yeah.
And that was enough for me. You know, that was the rock bottom moment, and I was like, I'm not doing this again.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, sorry again to hear about your dad. You were sort of blessed with this rock bottom moment that, you know, skyrocketed you to sobriety. What about those people struggling, listening right now? They might be struggling with their relationship to alcohol. What can they do without having some, you know, a death? They have to sort of change them, you know? And you did mention awareness. So, like, let's pretend they're aware that they have a problem and they're looking to get a change. What can they do to sort of change their relationship with alcohol?
Honestly, I think sometimes the worst part sometimes is the hardest part of it is the awareness. And it's that first step, because it's really confronting to recognize that you have a problem. Especially because binge drinking, in my case, is so normalized. People who binge drink don't necessarily think that they have a problem with alcohol. They're like, I can stop this at any point in time. You've got to have people around you that are supportive in what you're trying to do, because, again, in a culture that is very conducive of drinking to celebrate everything, finding people who understand what it is that you're trying to do and are willing to actually go on that journey with you and not make you feel bad for doing something that inherently is acting like a mirror to their own lifestyle choices. Like, when I started having these conversations with my friends back in the day, you know, Hong Kong is a place, no one's fucking sober. Like, everyone's like off their chops all the time. And I stopped being invited to places because people no longer knew what to do with me. And it was always like, come on, just have one for the road. Like, you know, you used to be so fun. I'd be like, I'm still fun. I'm just not drunk fun. You know, like, I can still have conversations, and it brings your awareness to, like, I'd be watching people. I remember a guy trying to come up to me and having this deep and meaningful conversation. He's just spitting all over me. And I'm just like, oh my God, how is this ever okay? But you've also, with those people, you've got to find something that's greater than yourself. And when I first quit, I didn't know what to do with myself, because if you're like me, I drank because I didn't like myself. I drank as a coping strategy, and I drank to sort of mask a lot of the emotional pain that I was feeling at that particular time. And you've got to find something else to deal. You've got to have another outlet. And I remember meeting, I went to AA once and decided it wasn't the right avenue for me. However, I did meet somebody who I really resonated with there, who was also in the fitness industry, who had a similar journey. And I was like, look, I am angry. I'm frustrated as fuck. I don't know how to deal with all the negative emotions, because I feel like an outlet's been taken away from me. Like, now I have to sit in this discomfort. Like, what do you do with that? And she's like, you have to find a purpose, something greater than yourself, something to belong to that's outside of your world. And I was like, right. She's like, okay, I go to a triathlon club. And I was like, okay, well, what happens at triathlon club? I went to triathlon club. So again, we come back to fitness, and it gave me a sense of purpose. It gave me something to do on the weekends, because, you know, once I got into half Ironman training, I was out there on a Saturday for 6 to 8 hours training. So I'd be up at 4:30 in the morning. I'd be doing my bike ride, my brick session. Then I'd be swimming in the afternoon. You know, my partner was really hungover. He did his own thing. And, you know, on Sunday again, I'd be out. I never got to a moment where I'd be like, fuck, I'm sitting at home alone on a Saturday night. I'd be like, right, I have to go to bed at like 7:30 because I have to get up at 4 a.m. So I never had FOMO. I had this entire new community who had similar things happen, because everybody's in fitness for a reason, right? Everybody you'll find in fitness has a reason for why they got into fitness in the first place. And a lot of them had a similar trajectory to me. So they got what I was trying to do. We'd be out drinking Diet Cokes and talking about transition times in a bar, you know? Like, and in the 2.5 years that it took me to go from never swimming 100 meters to hiring a swim coach to learn how to swim, to then 2.5 years later, qualifying for world champs. By that stage, I didn't think about drinking at all. I didn't feel like I was missing out on anything. And I had this whole other skill set. So when I stopped doing half Ironman, I didn't feel the need to do either. So it's almost like at the beginning, I replaced one addiction with another. But by the end, I needed neither. And that was what it took to get me out of it. So yeah, awareness is first, finding a supportive community, and then finding something else to take your mind off the fact that you're not drinking.
Yeah. 100%.
Was really helpful.
Yeah, it's real simple, right? Find something more important than going and hitting the piss. It's that
100%.
simple. And
especially, you know, like it gives you a goal. Like when you have something that you're focused on that's outside of yourself, that is a big goal like that is performance-based especially, it's much easier.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it doesn't have to be, like, a lot of people might think, you know, they have to be super passionate about their careers. It can be a physical challenge. I know
100%.
me having children keeps me a lot more stable than when I was a single lad running around with no kids. Let's rewind a little bit to the hardest thing you ever did physically. You mentioned the race in the desert, 1,000 kilometers. Tell us a little bit more about what that looked like and what that was like.
Well, so to back it up a little bit further, in 2017, I was diagnosed with degenerative osteoarthritis in my left hip.
I forgot to mention the bionic hip as well in the
well,
intro.
so this is what leads us to Mongol Derby. So I was diagnosed with degenerative osteoarthritis. I also tore the labrum top and bottom. So it was bone on bone for 8 months. And I was told that I had no alternative but to have a full hip replacement. So I went into hospital in August 2017, had an anaphylactic reaction to my antibiotics, died on the table, had to be resuscitated 4 times. And then when I woke up, there was there was no conversation with God. I wasn't abducted by aliens. There's no fucking white light. Afterlife is a farce. Don't do it. Fucking 1 out of 10, dying is not recommended. Very overrated. Yeah. There's no afterlife.
Try to stay as alive as possible, everyone.
Yeah.
So.
But I woke up and I had this resounding moment of clarity. And the last thing I'd done before I went into hospital was this talk at a high school about mental health, because based on all my challenges, you know, in my childhood, I'd been involved with a mental health charity. I'd been in a school talking about my journey. And at the end of my talk, to cut a long story short, one of the students at the school had come up to me and been like, you know, I just wanted to let you know that, you know, today you saved my life, because today was the day I was going to kill myself. Wow. And listening to you share your story has made me realize that I'm not alone and I'm going to ask for help. Now, that was the last thing I had done before surgery. So when I woke up in ICU on a breathing tube, being like, thank fuck I'm alive, but also, holy shit, I had this moment, and that's the type of person I want to be. And I think you have these big, profound moments, or these incredibly traumatic experiences that kind of give you a moment of like, what do I want to fucking do with my life? What is the type of person I want to be? What kind of energy do I want to bring to the people and places around me? And I was like, 1, I want to inspire more people to have conversations that could save people's lives. But 2, I will never again take this life for granted, ever. And the first challenge that I decided to take up with my bionic hip was the Mongol Derby. And I'd heard about it through a member at the gym. And it's the longest and toughest horse race in the world. So it's 1,000 kilometers across the Mongolian desert.
Did you have any horse riding experience going to this?
So I may have embellished it a little bit in my application. I grew up and I taught myself to ride when I was very, very little on my next door neighbor's dog. And then,
okay, dog riding.
As you do. And then I'd done some stuff with the riding club for disabled, like I'd led horses around, and then I'd done some eventing up until I was like 15. My dad used to take me to pony club. I did the whole horse riding scene until it got too expensive, and then I went off to university and never touched again. So I'd had this 20-year hiatus. But when I applied, I was like, yeah, I'm going to be able to ride. It's going to be fine. Semi-wild horses, so some of these horses hadn't even been broken in. And I was like, you know what? I'll just figure it out when I get there. This is my whole life philosophy. Say yes to the big, crazy adventure that you think is going to set your soul on fire, and then just figure out all the how-tos afterwards. That's how you gotta live life. Don't give yourself a minute to think about the shit stuff that could happen. Just think about what could be the greatest thing that could come out of it. So I turn up to this race. It's like a 10-day race. And I am the least experienced rider by a country mile. So there are professional polo players there. There are show jumpers there. There are gillaroos. There are, dressage riders. There's endurance riders who have been doing this for like 10 or 20 years and have competed on a world stage. And then there's little old me who's like, yeah, I used to event when I was like 15.
I've ridden some dogs in my time.
Exactly. So I'm like, you'll be fine. So it's, you obsess over the fact that you have 5 kgs of gear that has to fit into this saddlebag. That's the only thing that you're allowed to take with you for the entire race. And it goes on the bag. You have to figure out how to put it on the bag. You have to figure out how to pack it. I didn't know how to do any of this stuff. What they don't tell you is that every 40 kilometers you have to change horses. So then you bond with a horse or you don't bond with a horse. And then 40 kilometers later, you have to navigate it from A to B. Can't navigate my way out of a paper bag, FYI. And you get to the next checkpoint, you have to get it through its vet check, and then you have to take off your saddlebag, and then you have to saddle up the next horse and ride out. So it's quite hectic. I was put on a racehorse from the beginning. Awesome horse. It was this kid's prize racehorse. I was like, I'd been presented with this, this little present at the beginning being like, we are now allies. And they'd given us this race briefing at the beginning. They're like, just be careful because at the start we lose at least 2 people in the marmot holes because in Mongolia, the ground is dead flat on the terrain that we were starting out in. Like it's very, the terrain over there, Mongolia is beautiful. But there's, marmots live there and they dig these massive holes in there that are hugely deep and the horse goes down and you either come off the top or they break a leg or whatever. It's quite full on. And I was like, God, the poor suckers that's going to, sucks to be those people. You pay like this huge amount to do this race and then you are like done in, the first 100 meters. That would suck. Anyway, we're galloping along. I'm with the front leaders because I'm on this awesome racehorse. We come to a watering hole. And against my better judgment, I go in this watering hole. You're in the fucking desert. What could possibly go wrong? I've gone this watering hole. Other people have come out. I'm like, right, it's time to get out. I've gone straight forward, following another horse out instead of taking the left where everybody else is left. And what I don't know is there's a massive drop off.
Oh, God.
My horse has gone straight down. I've gone straight over the top of it, straight underneath it. And I'm lying on the bottom of this fucking pond in the middle of the desert, seeing these hooves come down and thinking, holy shit, I'm about to fucking drown in a desert. Like, who does this?
And you're by yourself?
Yeah.
Fuck.
So the horse goes over me, tramples me on the bottom. The only thing that saves me is the fact that it's soft mud on the bottom of this. My horse goes straight over the top and fucking leaves. So I come out, I pop out of the water hole. There's the race truck that's next to it, just videoing the whole scenario, of course, because they're doing a Facebook Live and this is the start of this incredible race. And we've lost one of the Australian riders straight away because she's decided to go for a swim. Horse has gone off in the opposite direction. Horse was never seen again. Kit was never seen again. Some herder out there is going to be picking out a spare G-string being like, what is this thing that we're... But I'm just sitting there thinking, I've just paid my entire life savings to come and do this race, and I've prepared for this race for 4 years. And in 30 minutes, I've made a decision that's cost me an entire fucking race. I don't know if you've ever had one of those decisions where you're like, I've just completely managed to derail my entire dream in 30 minutes. But that was what I had. And I was like, oh my God. Now, there are 2 categories in this race. There's the adventure category, and then there's the competitive one. Now, if I asked for help and I asked the race truck to take me to the next station where I could get a new horse, I would have been out of the competitive category and in adventure. And I was like, fuck this, I'm not going to do it. So I picked myself up, dusted myself off, gave this laughing interview to Facebook and was like, what the fuck have you done, Alexa? And then I took off walking and I get to this house in the middle of nowhere. No one speaks English in Mongolia. And this man comes out and he's got 2 daughters there. And I'm trying to mime to this guy in Mongolia. I'm like, he's seeing this sopping wet white female come walking up to his house with a horse riding helmet on, no horse.
No G-string.
No G-string, thank God. But just sopping wet. And he's looking at me and I'm just like, so horse race, boom, and then horse. Can you help me find my horse? And I'm like, car, can you drive me to find my horse? It's like, the fuck? He starts laughing. Anyway, he bundles us all into his little Prius in the hills of Mongolia, and I'm sitting there with this whole family in the back. I've got my little GPS finding this next station, and we're driving around the hills of Mongolia, and we break down in the hills of Mongolia. I have $4 Australian on me because that's all I have on my whole person because everything is in my saddlebag. I give him the $4 and I get out and I walk to this next station. Long story short, I get to this next station. I didn't ask for help, so I'm still in the race. But they're like, as a penalty, you're going to have to wait till everybody else leaves before you get the last of the horses. I'd lost this kid's prize racehorse. I was blacklisted for 3 stations after. I got the worst horses. From then on in, I got chased by a wild dog into a station, and they are massive, like, think Cujo-style wild dogs that are protecting the girls out there. Every worst-case scenario had happened. I was at the back by myself, unable to navigate. And the only thing that got me through that entire race was thinking, right, just get to the next station and reassess. If you really can't do it, you can quit. And I'd get to the next station and then I'd reassess and I'd be like, right, I got to the next station, put me on a new horse. And then you'd be like, all right, just try and get to the next station. And if you really can't do it, you can fucking quit. And on the 3rd day, I caught the rest of the competitors.
Fuck yeah.
I lost them the next day because then I got lost in the mountains again. But, you know, I made it to the end of the race with an hour to spare. I was the last person across the line. And it was the best thing to this day that I've ever done. And it was probably my proudest moment because against all odds, I'd managed to pick myself up and do this thing that for 3 or 4 days, I had to every day make a conscious decision to keep going because every bone in my body wanted to quit.
Fuck. In true Alexa fashion, you just you didn't take the easy route, did you? You
No,
could have gone adventure
definitely
mode.
did not take the easy route. No.
Fucking hell.
Yeah.
Well, that sort of leads on to a little bit about your book. So you signed a book deal off the back of your Naked and Afraid experience. Congratulations. That's
Thank you.
fucking huge. And you
Big
definitely
deal.
sound like you have been through enough shit in your life to have an opportunity like this.
Yeah.
Without giving too much away, what's one sort of key message from the book that you're trying to get through to people reading?
That with the right attitude, you can pretty much survive anything.
Love that. Absolutely
Yeah.
love that. And while we're on, like, what's it like to write a book? Is it fucking as
Oh my
hard as
God.
it sounds? Or
Yeah, it is. You think that telling your own story is going to be easy, but I think there's a whole lot of imposter syndrome that comes into it as well, right? You're like, well, what if no one wants to read this? I think, look, the beauty of my story is that there are, like I said at the beginning, I feel like I've lived like 1,000 lives and I've been through so much stuff that there's something in it for everyone, you know? So whether you were bullied, whether you had to overcome addiction, whether you had parents who had mental health issues, you know, whether you relate to training being your therapy or you want to do more hard things or whatever it is, there's sort of, I don't want to say a lesson because I don't need to necessarily teach people anything, but I want to offer an alternative way of looking at scenarios. And I think that's what I'm going to try and do with this. You know, like everything I've sort of been through, I've come out the other side and I'm always laughing because if you're not laughing, you're crying. And I think that's what I want to come across in the book, that there is always a way. You just have to, you know, to be a great problem solver, you have to have problems, you know, and it's kind of just that alternative way of looking at adversity. And, you know, we spoke a little bit about resilience at the beginning and, you know, my biggest piece of advice to people now when they want to build resilience is there is a marked difference between getting uncomfortable within your comfort zone, which for athletes is training. You know, for me, training, leveraging physical discomfort to build resilience. It's one of the easiest ways to do it. But then there's also getting out of your comfort zone altogether. And that's what Naked and Afraid was for me. It was an opportunity to put myself in an environment that I had absolutely no control over. I had no idea what the outcome was going to be. There was a very good chance I could fail at it. But it was also an opportunity to learn an entirely new skill set. So I think, you know, if you are in a position where you're an athlete or you're in the physical training space and you want to embrace discomfort, then think of ways to get outside of your comfort zone, because a hard training session is still within your comfort zone because you understand what physical pain is. You know what a hard training session feels like. You know that you're going to make it out the end, and you can manipulate whatever variables you need to give you a positive outcome. Choose to take on something that is well outside of that, where you potentially have to learn something that you're not good at, because I think there's something so beautiful about embracing being a beginner again.
Yeah, they say smooth seas don't make skillful sailors. One of my favorite quotes of all time. Saying that to a girl with a sailor's mouth over there. So you got challenges. Like if there's something you're scared of, like go towards that. See,
100%.
like you said, dip your toes. If you've got social anxiety, say hello to the person in the cafe, just something like that. The guy or girl serving you coffee, just little things, baby steps. And next thing you know, you'll be racing across Mongolian deserts, throwing yourself into Colombian islands naked and afraid with no food, water, and shelter with random Amish men.
Exactly. Who doesn't want to do that?
That could be next on the horizon. All right, Alexa, I'm getting mindful of the time here. So as always, it's an absolute pleasure to talk to you. I usually ask my guests to tell people where to find them, but Action Alexa is like branded into my head. That's just her name. So you can follow Alexa at Action Alexa on Instagram, and anywhere else we can follow you. When can we expect this book to land?
Oh my God. Well, it's a long process. So I'm thinking it's probably going to be next year sometime. But like, don't worry. If you follow me, you won't be able to miss it because I will be singing it from the heavens.
I love that. Well, I'm proud of you. And is there anything you want to leave the people with? Any last message?
Oh my gosh. Just say yes to every opportunity that you get that sets your soul on fire, and just figure out the how-tos later, because, you know, there would be nothing worse than getting to the end of your life and feeling like you didn't actually live.